dear devotees. Thank you very much for being with us once again in this weekly series of videos presenting the Gita for Everyone program. In this program, we are analyzing the different chapters of the Bhagavad Gita in a very simple way. We use the formula of remembering one word, one example, one verse. So in this way, we can easily remember, understand, and also present the Bhagavad Gita as it is. So let's just start with the title. The title of chapter 5, it's quite unique. Karma Yoga, Action in Krishna Consciousness. Very similar to chapter 3. In fact, there are only 3 chapters that Srila Prabhupada allowed to carry on or keep the Sanskrit title. Karma Yoga in chapter 3, Karma Yoga, Action in Krishna Consciousness, and also chapter 6, Dhyana Yoga. So let's see the difference and why this chapter carries that title, Karma Yoga, Action in Krishna Consciousness. So the word here is action. We want to remember about the chapter. And what does it mean? Action, it refers to the fact that because it's in the sequence of chapter 2, 3, and 4, chapter 5 basically explains what happens or what is the result of somebody who applies Krishna consciousness in terms of knowing who we are, knowing what is our identity, understanding that knowledge that we require to achieve perfection. So here Krishna will explain what happens, how does it look, how is that consciousness of the person who has applied Krishna consciousness, as he explained in the previous 3 chapters. So we start with the title, Karma Yoga, Action in Krishna Consciousness. Just like when you take a medicine and there is some ingredients, some chemical, something in the constitution of that particular remedy, that when it becomes active, then the symptoms of the disease start going away. So we start with the structure. First of all, what happens in the beginning? The chapter 5 begins with Arjuna's question in text number 1. And why these 2 chapters, chapter 3 and 5, have a very similar title. One of the reasons is because the questions that Arjuna presents in the beginning of chapter 3 are very similar to the one presented in text number 1 of chapter 5. And basically the question is, why do I have to work? If you have explained all what you explained in the case of chapter 3, what Krishna explained in chapter 2, why do I have to work? Again, the same question comes here. And Prabhupada explains that the confusion of Krishna is for our benefit, because generally we are very confused about understanding what is a spiritual life. We think that spiritual life is something like inertia, Srila Prabhupada had said in a chapter in chapter 3, in one of the purports. So Arjuna basically is asking the same question again. So Krishna has the chance to reinforce the understanding that Krishna consciousness means practical service, and specifically working for him with love and devotion. So that's how the chapter begins. Arjuna presenting his first question. And then the whole chapter is basically dedicated to explain the characteristics of the one who works in devotion. He's asking what is better. Should I work in devotion or should I renounce in knowledge? That is the question that Arjuna is presenting. And instead of making an elaborate philosophical explanation about the difference between these two, directly Krishna answers that working in devotion is better. But in order for him to explain or to convince Arjuna that what is the benefit, what is the result of Krishna consciousness, he describes the worker in devotion, the yogi and the pure soul acting with the purpose of purification, acting in many, many ways, but differentiated from the material reactions that you get otherwise if you don't dedicate your work to Krishna. So, Karma Yoga, Action in Krishna Consciousness, that is the topic. And what is the result of Krishna Consciousness? It's the main topic of this chapter 5. It has only 29 verses. A tip to remember the numbers of verses in the Bhagavad Gita is that some chapters have 20, within the 20 range of 20 verses, others 30, others 40, and then 70. So it's only 4 ranges that we find in the Bhagavad Gita. And how does it end? Krishna, in the last verse, in text 29, remember, one word, one example, one verse. So our verse here will be 29. And Prabhupada called this verse the peace formula. In other words, what is the result of Krishna consciousness? According to this chapter, is peace. So that's how the chapter ends. What are the contents? The topic is the description of a worker in devotion, a worker in Krishna consciousness. And there are several sections, very interesting, but basically all describe the vision, the state of mind, the detachment, and the relationship that that worker, that bhakti yogi has with the Supreme and has with everything that surrounds him. Interestingly, for understanding that are the analogies presented in this chapter. Two main analogies, one in text number 10 and the other one presented in text number 16. This first one, the worker, is compared to the lotus flower. And what is the characteristic of the lotus flower is that you may find it in the middle of the mud and it doesn't get contaminated. That's the comparison to the worker in Krishna consciousness. The other characteristics in text number 16 is that the knowledge or the realization that the yogi has when applies this knowledge is that it's compared to the sunlight. It becomes enlightened. So just like when the sunlight comes up, then everything, all the darkness, all the shadows are dispersed. So those are the two analogies to understand how Krishna consciousness in practical terms bring results to the person who applies it. So then we have the connection. The connection with the previous chapter is that here it will be represented in a practical form of a worker. What is the result of applying chapter 2, 3, and specifically chapter 4? So that's the connection with chapter 4. The connection with chapter 6, the next one, is that at the end of the chapter, Krishna will refer to the process of Astanga Yoga. And you can read in that purport how Prabhupada explicitly explains all the aspects of the octuple process of Astanga Yoga. Personal. Why is it important, this chapter in our life? How can we relate to this chapter in our life? Is that we can measure our advancement. We can read practically any verse after text number 6 and compare to how much are we advancing. That's one practical application. And the other application is when you are seeking for proper association, devotee association, or specifically a spiritual master, you can see this is a devotee who is advancing Krishna consciousness. So it has many practical applications. And specifically, Srila Prabhupada said about this verse, or this chapter rather, that chapter 5 is the practical explanation of the application of Krishna consciousness. So it's almost at the end of the section, of the first section. So we are coming to the closure of Krishna's explanation to Arjuna. What do we need to know? The before and after of Krishna consciousness. The first chapter was the lamentation, and the 5th chapter is the after. What happens after you apply the knowledge that Krishna has given us so far in chapter 2, 3, and 4. So thank you very much. We hope that you follow us in the next series of videos that we will be presenting every week. Hare Krishna.